Welcome to my Bard story.
And welcome. Glad you could join us for this deep dive. Today we're really getting into, well, a truly foundational passage. Genesis chapter 1, starting at verse 26 and going right through to chapter 2, verse 4a.
That's right. This section covers the absolute climax of God's creation week, humanity, and then crucially introduces God's rest.
Exactly. And we've got some excellent study notes to guide us excerpts titled Genesis 1.262.4a, The Creation of Mankind of the Sabbath, plus some corresponding notes in Chinese, pulling together insights from, some really key international biblical scholars and commentaries. We'll be using the NIV, the New International Version, for the scripture readings.
And our goal here, our mission for this deep dive, is really to unpack the theology, understand the historical context, like the ancient Near East background, and maybe most importantly for you listening, draw out the practical side. What does this mean for ministry, for teaching, for our lives today?
Yeah, we want to highlight those insights from the notes that maybe shed new light on familiar verses or, help clarify some tricky parts, things that offer fresh understanding.
It's not just about head knowledge, is it?
Not at all. It's about letting the depth of this passage, informed by solid scholarly work, really speak to us about who God is, who we are, and how we're meant to live in his world.
Okay, well, let's jump right in with the text itself. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground."
So right away, you notice this verse is different. It stands out from the previous creation commands.
How so?
Well, our notes highlight that even though it's part of the sixth day's work, like the land animals just before this, the way humanity's creation is introduced is, it's set apart. It's much more solemn.
It's not just let there be.
Exactly. It's this deliberative, let us make mankind. Scholars like Westerman and Matthews point out this really elevates the moment. Yeah. It signals God's specific, unique intention for humans. Something special is happening here.
And it immediately throws up one of the biggest questions in this chapter, doesn't it? That plural. Let us make. Who is us? What do the notes say about the different scholarly ideas?
Yes, the U.S. It's a classic point of discussion. And the notes lay out the main interpretations that have been debated for, centuries. One of the earliest views, going way back to the Church Fathers and mentioned by scholars like Westerman and Armstrong, is that it's a reference to the Trinity, God the Father speaking with the Son and the Spirit.
So an early hint of the Trinity in the Old Testament.
Kind of. The notes clarify it's not an explicit doctrine here, obviously, not like in the New Testament. But this view sees it as providing theological space, maybe a foreshadowing, that aligns with later Trinitarian revelation. It gave early Christians a hook for that understanding. Then there's another really significant view supported by quite a few modern scholars, Gunkel, von Rad, Zimmerli, Sailhammer, and John Walton is a key voice here too. This interpretation suggests God is speaking to his heavenly court, or the divine council.
Like the angels.
Essentially, yes. Wow. The idea draws parallels from other ancient Near Eastern texts where the main god addresses an assembly of lesser divine beings. And we see hints of this elsewhere in the Old Testament too, right? Like it's 1 Kings 22, Job 1, the sons of God presenting themselves before the Lord. Okay? So the idea is God is announcing his plan to the celestial beings who serve him. Walton especially fits this into his bigger picture of like cosmic temple inauguration, God assigning roles.
But doesn't that raise questions, about God needing counsel or sharing his creative power? Especially considering how much Genesis 1 emphasizes God's sole authority.
That's a really important tension, and the notes do bring it up. Westerman, for instance, notes this potential conflict, particularly for the P source, the priestly source, often seen behind Genesis 1, which strongly emphasizes God's absolute uniqueness and power. Would that author really depict God consulting others? It's a fair question, which leads to a third major view, the plural of deliberation, or maybe self-exhortation. This is favored by many grammarians and scholars like Koenig, Juncker, Cassuto, and Bruce Waltke.
So God talking to himself, in a way.
Sort of. It could be a plural of majesty, emphasizing God's greatness, or maybe more likely it represents God's internal counsel, reflecting the immense weight and seriousness of creating humanity. Like God pausing and saying, okay, now for this crucial step, how shall we proceed? It underlines the gravity of the moment.
That makes sense too.
Yeah, and Westerman also mentions a less common idea from earlier scholars, that maybe it's just a literary way to avoid suggesting God has a direct physical form, or maybe avoiding the first-person singular if God isn't fully revealing himself yet. but that's less emphasized in our notes.
Okay, so we have these main options: Trinity, heavenly court, divine self-talk. How do the notes help us weigh them, especially thinking about the original audience?
Well, the note suggests that while the Trinitarian view is vital for later Christian theology, the heavenly court idea might be the most understandable for the original ancient Israelite readers, given their cultural context and those other biblical hints. But, and this is really key, highlighted by Waltine and Wenham, verse 27, immediately switches to the singular, in his own image. This makes it crystal clear that God alone is the creator and the source of the image. Whatever the us means, it doesn't mean co-creators. God is the sole agent.
That clarification is crucial.
Absolutely. And Walke adds that fascinating theological layer, drawing on Karl Barth, suggesting maybe the divine us anticipates the created human plurality of male and female in verse 27, a reflection of God's own relational nature.
Wow, that's a deep thought.
It is, but the main takeaway from the let us make is really its narrative function. It signals the profound importance, the solemn decision, the unique status God gives to creating humanity. It sets us apart.
That uniqueness is then described using those two famous terms, image, elam, and likeness, demut. What exactly do those mean here, according to the notes?
Right, elam and demut. The notes reflect a strong consensus among scholars. Wenham, Walke, Matthews are mentioned that these two words are basically used synonymously here. It's a Hebrew way of emphasizing one core idea: humanity's special status and relationship with God.
So not two different things, image and likeness.
Not really distinct concepts in this context. Elam might sometimes lean more towards a concrete representation, like a statue, and demut towards similarity. But together, as Westermann notes, they point to this fundamental correspondence between humans and God. And crucially, the notes are very clear. This is not about physical appearance. God is spirit. So being in his image isn't about, having the same shape.
So what is it about then? Function, relationship.
Exactly. It's functional, relational, representational. That's the consensus highlighted by scholars like Engel and Bramer, Sailhamer, and Westermann, building on theologians like Barth and Stam. It means we have certain capacities and a specific role that allow us to reflect God and act as his representatives in creation.
Okay, what kind of capacities or qualities are we talking about?
The notes list several. Our personality, our ability for aesthetic appreciation, our capacity for relationships with God and each other, very importantly, our capacity for authority and responsibility, and our moral and spiritual qualities.
So things like conscience, knowing right from wrong.
Yes, Matthews points to that. Spiritual capacities, ethical sensitivity, conscience. These internal aspects enable us to connect with God and make moral choices. And Wenham stresses the representative role being God's regent, reflecting his sovereignty by exercising dominion. So it's not just possessing abilities like reason, but being God's unique counterpart, able to relate to him and commissioned to act for him. Sailhamer and Westermann both really emphasize that, humanity as God's partner.
And that idea of being God's representatives leads right into the purpose stated in verse 26.
Yes.
Dominion, right?
Precisely. Let us make mankind so that they may rule. The ruling mandate, Rada in Hebrew, flows directly from bearing the image. The notes point out Rada is a strong verb, often describing a monarch's powerful rule. Wenham and Matthews note this.
So it implies real authority.
It does, and this is the critical point Wenham and Waltine stress, because it comes from bearing God's image. It has to be exercised in a way that mirrors God's own character. It's responsible rule, not tyranny. We're meant to be like wise governors, reflecting God's benevolent care, not abusing power.
And the scope is specified.
Yes, over the fish, birds, livestock, wild animals, all the creeping things. It's a comprehensive commission to manage the animal kingdom as God's representatives.
A high calling indeed. Okay, let's look at Genesis 1, verse 27. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them.
This verse is just packed with significance. Scholars like Wenham and Matthews often highlight its poetic structure, that threefold repetition.
Created.
Exactly. The verb bara, created, is used 3 times. Our notes remind us that bara in the Old Testament always refers to God's unique, divine act of creation, often bringing something totally new into being effortlessly. Repeating it 3 times here really hammers home the uniqueness and supreme importance of creating humanity. And notice again that shift we talked about from us in verse 26 to in his own image here in 27. Walsky points out this immediately reinforces that God alone is the source of the image. We bear God's image, not the image of any council or anything else.
And then the specific addition. Male and female, he created them. Why is that distinction so vital here, connected to the image of God?
This is hugely important. Scholars like Wenham and Matthews really focus on this. It emphasizes that both sexes, male and female, fully and equally bear God's image. The image isn't limited to one gender.
So humanity is male and female in God's image.
Yes, the singular mankind is realized in the plurality of male and female. This duality, this relational aspect, is presented as fundamental to what it means to be human. Now, Matthews and Wenham are careful to say this doesn't mean God has gender. Rather, the basic structure of human society, established by God as male and female together, is how we collectively reflect his image. And maybe, as Walt, Kaki, and Barth suggest, this even hints at the relationality within God himself.
That equality from the start is so foundational.
Absolutely. It underpins human dignity, our identity, relationships, marriage, and it's crucial for fulfilling the blessing that comes next in verse 28.
All right, let's read verse 28. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds of the air and over every living creature that moves on the ground."
So immediately after creating them in his image, God blesses humanity. Sailhammer notes this blessing is more comprehensive than the one given earlier to the sea and sky creatures.
And the blessing contains these commands: be fruitful, increase, fill, subdue, rule. Are these just orders or something more?
It's definitely more than just orders. The notes explain, drawing on Westerman, Matthews, Sailhammer, and Wenham, that these imperatives, puru, unitu, umilu, actually function as a blessing that gives the ability to do these things.
So God is empowering them for this.
Exactly. He's not just telling them to multiply. He's blessing them with fertility, with the potential to fill the earth. Westerman calls this blessing specific to humans as God's counterparts. And then the mandate to subdue the earth and rule over the creatures is repeated. Subdue, as Walton and Wenham explain, means bringing under control, managing resources for human benefit. Rule, again, is dominion over animals.
But still responsible dominion.
Still responsible. Wenham stresses this connection again because it flows from the image of God. It's about stewardship, reflecting God's care, not exploitation. The scope is clearly comprehensive over all animal life.
A gift of potential and a commission for responsibility. What about food? Verse 29 deals with that. Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food."
Right. So here God makes specific provision for what humans should eat in this original state. Westerman and Wenham in the notes point out it's explicitly a vegetarian diet.
And the language "I give you" is significant.
Yes. Westerman notes the phrase "hina naiti lam" sounds like a formal grant, an official assignment of these plants for human use.
Seed-bearing plants, fruit trees. Any particular significance to that specific menu?
Well, one major point the notes bring out from Wenham and Matthews is the contrast with other ancient Near Eastern myths where humans were made to feed the gods. Here, it's the complete opposite. God generously provides for humans. He's the sustainer.
That's a huge difference.
It is. And scholars like Wenham also see this initial vegetarian diet as reflecting an ideal state of peace, maybe even hinting at future eschatological peace, like in Isaiah 11 or 65, where harmony reigns.
A picture of perfect peace, even in eating.
Yeah.
What about the animals? Verse 30. "And to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds in the sky and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so.
So, just like for humans, God provides for all other living creatures everything that has the breath of life, Netirwaya, and their diet is also specified. Every green plant, Yerikwer.
So animals were vegetarian too. No predators in the original creation.
That's the strong implication. As Wenham and others point out in the notes, it suggests an original state of complete harmony in the animal kingdom, no predation, no violence. It fits the picture of universal peace.
Wow, like those Isaiah passages you mentioned.
Exactly. The notes connected to those visions of shalom, Isaiah 11.69, 65.25, suggesting this was God's primordial ideal. And the phrase, "and it was so," confirms this divine decree for peaceful sustenance was established.
An entirely nonviolent world. Amazing. And after establishing all this, we get the final evaluation in verse 31. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day.
This is the grand finale of the 6 days. God looks at everything, all that he had made, and the evaluation is upgraded. Not just good, but very good. Imshet.
What's the significance of adding that very...
The notes, citing Matthews, Westerman, and Wenham, explain that very signals the ultimate perfection, the completeness, the absolute rightness of creation at this point. With humanity now present as the pinnacle, reflecting God's image and given dominion, the whole system is perfectly suited to God's purposes.
So it's not just functional, but perfect.
Perfect. Waltke and Wenham emphasize it implies moral and ethical perfection too. No flaws, no corruption, no sin yet. Everything is exactly as God intended. The notes stress this very good state is the crucial backdrop for understanding the tragedy of the fall later in Genesis 3.
It sets the standard.
Precisely. And the ending phrase, the sixth day, using the definite article in Hebrew as Wenham and Spicer note, might subtly point to its climactic role just before the unique seventh day.
Creation complete. Perfect. Ready. Which brings us to chapter 2, verse 1. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array.
This verse functions like a concluding summary statement for the whole six-day account, as Sailhamer and Matthews observe. The heavens and the earth, Hashemayim Hodian, that's the standard phrase for the entire cosmos, everything. Wenham and Spicer confirm this.
And all their vast array, what does that include?
That translates whale one. The word unliterally means host or army. Here, Wenham and Spicer explain, it means everything that fills the cosmos, stars, elements, creatures, everything God organized. It signifies the complete, ordered totality of creation.
And completed emphasizes finality.
Yes, the verb welu really stresses the perfection and finality of God's work. Sailhamer and Wenham even see it forming a kind of literary bracket, an inclusio, with Genesis 1.1 framing the whole creation narrative.
So the work of creating and ordering is done, which leads right into the seventh day. Genesis 2, verse 2. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work.
And here we hit the crucial theme, God's rest. Now, the notes mention a small textual detail here. Some ancient versions, like the Samaritan Pentateuch, the Septuagint, the Syriac, they read sixth day for when God finished the work.
To avoid implying he worked on the seventh?
Possibly. Wenham and Sailhamer mention that idea, but the standard Hebrew text, the Masoretic text, MT, clearly says seventh day. And scholars like Matthews and Wenham argue the MT reading suggests that the very act of stopping, of resting on the seventh day, is what perfects or completes the week. The finishing happens as he rests.
Okay, so what does this rest actually mean? The word is shak. Did God need a break? Was he tired?
That's a really important clarification the notes make, reflecting the scholarly consensus from Wenham, Matthews, Ross, and others. Shak primarily means to cease, to stop activity. It's not about resting because of fatigue. God doesn't get tired.
So why stop?
Because the work was done. Creation was complete, perfect, fully functional. He ceased creating because nothing more needed to be created at this stage. The cosmos was established.
Not fatigue, but completion. That's key. What about verse 3? Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done.
So God does two specific things to this day. He blessed it, Wekri, and he made it holy, Wekodeshu. Wenham and Matthews stress the significance here.
How is blessing a day different from blessing creatures? And what does holy mean for a unit of time?
Good question. Ross explains that blessing the day gives it special significance and favor. It's not about fertility, like with creatures, but about setting it apart. And making it holy, Kodashi, means exactly that. Consecrating it, distinguishing it from the other 6 days. It's dedicated to a special purpose related to God himself, as Sailhamer points out.
And this is the first time holy appears in the Bible.
Yes. Right here, applied to time. It establishes the sacredness of time and lays the theological foundation for the Sabbath command later given to Israel. And the reason given? Because on it, he rested. The notes also mention that phrase, created to make Weshim Lasho, which Matthews and Wenham think might emphasize the completion of the functional ordering of creation. God's rest and sanctification of the day become the model for our own rest and focus on God.
So God establishes this rhythm and makes time sacred. Now, verse 4a, this is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created.
Okay, this phrase, Elokal, this is the account of, or these are the generations of, is a really important structural marker in Genesis. The notes, citing Wenham, Matthews, Ross, explain that this Tolo formula usually introduces what comes next. It tells you the history or the developments that follow from whatever is named. Hamilton says it introduces the history that proceeded from.
And this is where the debate comes in. Is it the end of chapter 1 or the start of the next section?
Exactly, that's the scholarly discussion. Older views sometimes saw it as the ending. The colophon to 1.1 to 2.4a may be tied to source criticism ideas. But the vast majority of modern scholars, Wenham, Matthews, Ross, are clear on this, see it as a heading, a superscription, for the narrative that starts right after it in 2.4b.
Why the shift to seeing it as a heading?
Because of how tolo is used everywhere else in Genesis. It always introduces what comes from the thing mentioned. The tolo of Adam introduces his line. The tolo of Noah introduces the flood story and his family. As Walke puts it, tolo means what is generated from. So the account of the heavens and the earth introduces the story that unfolds from that completed creation, the garden, humanity's story, the fall.
Ah, that makes sense. It explains the change in style and focus in chapter 2 as well.
Precisely. It acts as a bridge, linking the cosmic creation to the human drama that takes place within it. It shows chapter 1 sets the stage for everything that follows.
Understanding that structure really helps connect the dots. Okay, we've walked through the verses, which is foundational, but now let's dive a bit deeper into some specific areas where scholars have really, chewed on the details. These are the insights that maybe give us those aha moments, things we might easily miss. So looking at the scholarly reflections in our notes, what are some areas that really stand out?
Well, that plural, let us make, in 1.26, definitely keeps scholars reflecting. Beyond just listing the options heavenly court, deliberation, Trinity, they really ponder the why. Why this specific phrasing here?
Yeah, what's the deeper significance?
Exactly. So Westerman, for instance, while acknowledging the ancient parallels for the heavenly court, still questions if it perfectly fits the strong monotheism of the presumed priestly source. He wonders if the author intended something pointing more to God's internal majesty or the solemnity of the decision itself. Then you have Walton, who firmly sees the divine council, reflecting on it as God assigning roles within his newly ordered cosmic administration, his cosmic temple. It's about setting up the management structure, if you will.
And Walke's point about the human plurality.
Yes, drawing on Barth, Walkthrough reflects on whether this divine plurality, us, is actually the ultimate reality mirrored in the human duality, male and female. This pushes it beyond grammar into deep theology about God's relational nature being reflected in our fundamental structure as humans.
So exploring these isn't about finding one simple answer.
Not necessarily. It's about appreciating the richness. Whether it highlights God presiding over his court, the immense weight he puts on creating us, or a reflection of his own relational being, all these reflections underscore humanity's extraordinary significance and the unique intentionality behind our creation. It invites contemplation on the mystery of God.
That's helpful. What about the image and likeness? What deeper reflections come from that?
Scholars really lean into the idea that element and mute are functional and relational. Matthews emphasizes the internal capacity, spiritual awareness, moral sensitivity, conscience as key parts of the image. It's our ability to connect with God and discern right from wrong. Wenham focuses heavily on the representative aspect. The image isn't just about having qualities like God, but about acting for God, being his regent, his vicegerent. This reflection means grappling with what it truly means to exercise delegated authority on earth, reflecting God's character in how we rule, manage, and relate.
So the image is active, not passive. It involves responsibility.
Very much so. Our actions are meant to visibly reflect God's reign.
Okay, and the original diet, Genesis 1.2930, what are the scholarly reflections there?
The main reflection centers on its theological meaning. Wenham, Westerman, Matthews, they see the universal vegetarianism as powerfully signifying a state of primordial shalom, peace, harmony, wholeness, without violence or bloodshed, even in the food chain.
And the connection to Isaiah?
Right. Wenham's reflection connecting this to the eschatological visions in Isaiah is significant. It suggests Genesis 1 isn't just describing the beginning, but painting a picture of God's ideal intention for creation. A state lost in the fall, but pointing towards the future hope of restoration, where that peace returns. Reflecting on this prompts thoughts about the profound nonviolence God originally intended.
A vision of what was lost and what is hoped for. What about God's rest, beyond just stopping work?
Yes, beyond cessation. Here, Walton's view, which we touched on, becomes central in reflection. His idea, based on ancient Near Eastern temple inaugurations, is that the deity's rest signifies taking up residence and beginning the work of ruling and maintaining order from the temple.
So God's rest is actually the start of his active reign.
That's the reflection. Applying this to Genesis 2, God's rest isn't inactivity. It's him entering his completed cosmic temple, the ordered universe to begin. His active sovereign governance, sustaining the order he established, is a transition from creating order to maintaining and ruling that order. It adds a whole layer of dynamic activity to the concept of divine rest.
That completely changes the feel of it. Okay, and finally, the Tolling formula in 2.4a, the reflection reinforces its function.
Yes, scholarly reflection solidifies the view that it's a heading, a superscription. The reflection emphasizes the why. Tolo consistently introduces what comes next throughout Genesis, the history generated from the preceding entity. Reflecting on this structure highlights the author's intent. Chapter 1 isn't separate from Chapter 2, it's the foundation. 2.4a is the bridge, signaling the shift to the human story unfolding within that created cosmos. It ensures we read Genesis as one continuous narrative, from cosmic origins to human history.
These reflections really add layers of meaning, don't they? It shows how much depth there is to explore. All right, now let's bring this home. We've delved into the text, considered scholarly reflections. What does all this mean for us today? For believers, for pastors, for anyone seeking to live faithfully? How did these ancient words speak into our modern lives? What are the core reminders from our notes?
Well, perhaps the most foundational reminder is about the dignity and purpose of humanity. Because we're made in God's image, every single person possesses immense inherent worth and dignity. Gangel and Bramer, Wenham, they stress this isn't based on what we do or achieve or possess. It's gifted by God in creation itself.
That's such a countercultural message today, isn't it? Where worth often feels tied to performance or status.
Absolutely, and understanding this deeply should radically shape how we treat others. We're called to see the image of God in everyone, regardless of background, belief, behavior, anything. It means actively resisting dehumanization in all its forms, prejudice, injustice, even just dismissing someone's inherent value.
How does this play out in ministry specifically?
It's foundational for everything. Pastoral care, evangelism, seeing people not just as projects but as precious image bearers God loves. It fuels social justice efforts. Think about it. How does truly seeing the imago Dei in the marginalized, the difficult person, the stranger, change how you interact, what you prioritize, the compassion you show? It should push us to help people find their identity in being God's image bearers, ultimately restored in Christ. And directly connected is dominion as stewardship. That mandate in 1.28 to rule and subdue, Wenham and Walton are clear. It's responsible care, not exploitation. Because it flows from the image, it reflects God's wise management.
So creation care isn't just a modern environmental issue, it's rooted right here.
It is. It's about managing all God's resources, environmental, financial, personal, responsibly. For churches, it means integrating creation care into discipleship and practice. How do our consumption patterns, our use of church resources, reflect our role as stewards? It's part of our core calling.
Another huge theme is the rhythm of work and rest.
Yes. God's own pattern work and rest is presented as a fundamental rhythm for human life. Sailhamer and Wenham see this as a divine design for our well-being.
And the seventh day being blessed and made holy. What's the takeaway about the sanctity of rest for us?
Genesis 2.23 shows God setting this time apart. Matthews explains Sabbath rest is more than just stopping work. It's for spiritual renewal, refocusing on God as creator and sustainer. It's about trusting that our ultimate security doesn't depend on endless work, but on God's provision and faithfulness.
That's a hard one in our busy culture, and especially in ministry.
Incredibly hard. Burnout is a real danger. But God's own example gives theological weight to rest. It's essential, not optional. Pastors especially need to model this. How can we lead from a place of rest, trusting God's work, not just our frantic efforts? How can we teach our congregations the discipline and blessing of true Sabbath? It requires intentionality.
It really does. What about God's provision? How does Genesis 1 remind us of that?
Well, verses 29-30, God providing food for humans and animals clearly shows his care and generosity. Wenham highlights this. The notes remind us this should foster deep gratitude and awareness of our dependence on him daily.
How can churches cultivate that sense of dependence and gratitude, especially when society pushes self-reliance?
By intentionally practicing gratitude in prayer before meals. By teaching generosity, recognizing everything is God's gift meant to be shared. By emphasizing that true security isn't in accumulation, but in trusting God's faithfulness. It's about fostering a posture of humility and thankfulness. The notes also bring out the mandate to be fruitful. That blessing in 1.28 is God's gift of procreative power, a commission to fill the earth with his image bearers, as Westerman noted.
How does that original blessing inform our view of family and life today?
While the command to physically fill the whole earth might be seen as fulfilled, the underlying value placed on life and family remains crucial. It grounds a biblical view of marriage as the God-ordained context for bringing up children. It speaks to the sanctity of all human life. Churches have a role in upholding marriage, supporting families, and affirming the preciousness of life as rooted in God's creative blessing. And drawing from those specific reminders in the Chinese notes, there's that call to live out God's holy likeness.
Connected to the image, right?
Yes. If we bear God's image and He is holy, then reflecting Him involves pursuing holiness. Genesis 1 sets the stage for later Scripture calling us to be holy. This means actively seeking godliness in thought, word, deed, relying on the Spirit. For pastors, it means personal holiness is key, and teaching congregations that faith involves a visible pursuit of God's character. The notes also stressed affirming the sacredness of marriage and family from 1.2728.
Reinforcing that point.
Exactly. Upholding marriage faithfulness, mutual love, raising children biblically. The notes see this as vital for church and society. Pastors play a key role here through teaching and counseling. And finally, that reminder about glorifying God in our work, linked to the dominion mandate.
Seeing work is more than just a job.
Precisely. Subduing the earth involves work, creativity. So our daily labor, in whatever field, is a primary way we serve God, exercise stewardship, and contribute to flourishing. Pastors can help people see their jobs as callings, opportunities for integrity, excellence, and witness. It's all part of glorifying God in His creation.
These reminders really bring it down to earth. This isn't just abstract theology, it touches every part of life. So let's try to quickly summarize the main threads we've followed in this deep dive. We started with the absolute peak of creation, humanity made after divine deliberation, uniquely in God's image. This establishes our inherent dignity, our role as representatives, and the equal value of male and female.
Right. And flowing from that image is the mandate for responsible dominion, for stewardship over creation. We saw the initial state was very good, marked by harmony, even a universal vegetarian diet pointing to God's ideal of peace.
Then we looked at God finishing His work and resting on the seventh day. Not from tiredness, but completion. He blessed and sanctified that day, setting a pattern of work and rest for us, grounding the Sabbath.
And we touched on key scholarly insights like the different views on us, the functional nature of the image, Walton's cosmic temple idea where rest means taking up rule, and the Tolo formula connecting the cosmic creation to the human story starting in 2.4b.
It really lays the foundation for so much, our understanding of God, ourselves, creation, work, rest, and God's ongoing purposes in the world.
It truly does. It's the blueprint of reality as God designed it, giving us a benchmark to understand our world now and God's ultimate restorative plan.
So as we close, here's something to really reflect on, especially for those of you in ministry leadership. We've talked about two profound truths: humanity's creation in God's image, establishing the dignity of every single person, and God's own pattern of rest, setting a vital rhythm for life. How might deeply embracing both of these truths genuinely transform how you approach ministry day to day? Specifically, how can you better balance the constant demands and urgent tasks with that essential God-given need for rest for yourself and those you lead, while simultaneously ensuring you consistently uphold and minister to the inherent dignity of every person, truly seeing God's image in them even when it's difficult?
That's a question that takes these big theological ideas right into the heart of pastoral reality, doesn't it? How does seeing the imago Dei in the person who frustrates you, or the one on the margins, or the one asking hard questions, how does that truly change your pastoral care, your preaching, your engagement? And on the other side, how do you as a leader resist the pressure to run on empty and instead model leaning into God's rhythm of rest, finding strength in Him? How does ministry flow differently when it comes from a place of Sabbath trust rather than anxious self-reliance? Maybe consider how that original very good creation informs your hope and proclamation amidst the brokenness we see, pointing towards the redemption God is working. These are the kinds of questions that can shape not just our thinking, but our very way of being in ministry this week.